Okay, good afternoon everyone. My name is Jim Watterston and I'm the Dean of the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here this afternoon. Can we start by acknowledging the traditional elders, the traditional owners of the lands upon which we meet today, and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. This is week 4 of our 4-week series. Hopefully you've been with us all the way through, Propelling Education Through a COVID-19 World. Today's episode is entitled Collective View, What Can We Realistically Achieve? So we're really going to try and pull it together today and think about the big picture that we've painted over the last 3 weeks, and then break it down to about what can we do now as we emerge through COVID-19. What can we take back to our classrooms, to our systems, and think about that different world that we've been talking about creating. As usual, we're going to take questions today on our Q&A function. And as we've promised over the last 3 weeks, we're also going to answer the previous questions that we didn't get time for through each of the sessions. We have our same panel today. Let me reintroduce them to you. Of course, we have our new MGSE Professor in Education Leadership, Yong Zhao. Welcome along, Yong. Professor Sandra Milligan, who's the Director of the Assessment Research Centre at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. Welcome along, Sandra. Of course, Laureate Professor John Hattie, world-renowned, known to everyone. Welcome along, John. We have Dr. Daniela Acquaro, who's the Program Director of Initial Teacher Education at the Melbourne Graduate School, along with a whole raft of other things that she does, which is fantastic. Dr. Melitta Hogarth, who's the Assistant Dean of Indigenous Studies at Melbourne Graduate School of Education. Welcome along, Melitta. And of course, last and certainly not least, Dr. Matt Harrison, who's a lecturer in Learning Intervention. Welcome to everyone. As usual, we've got our Twitter handle operating today, hashtag MGSE Propel, all in lowercase letters. And like the previous 3 episodes, we are recording this one, and it will be available on the MGSE YouTube channel. Without any further ado, so that we can get into this, I'd like to hand over to our moderator, Professor Janet Clinton, and welcome her along and congratulate her on the series so far. Thank you very much, Janet.
Thanks, Jim. Really excited to start with our last in the series of our webinars. I want to remind you that the webinars were designed to really get our thinking going about education for the future. As we know, the current pandemic has actually made us really consider what this new world is going to be like and what we're going to learn from this process. So we hope this series has prompted you all, as it has us, to propel our ideas and our focus, because what we want is a positive and impactful future. This episode is going to be a little different. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask all of our panellists, they're all here together, a series of questions. And what we've been doing is we've been looking at the questions and comments that you've been asking us over the past 3 weeks. And we brought those all together, and there were about 500 of them. Comments and questions on the panel sites and on the websites. So what we've done is we've looked for those really key themes that have come out. And then what we're going to do is target those this week. So we're going to ask some 6 key questions. And we're going to ask particular panelists to respond very briefly with a question. And the task is answer the question and make it as practical as you possibly can. We want to know how this week. So let me remind you about the last 3 episodes. In our first episode, Yong suggested a new world where students will have greater voice, and it's this that will change the grammar of schooling. We then heard from Sandra, who suggested, I think it was a revolution, Sandra, where you said, we really need to consider a whole new range of capabilities and how we're going to assess those capabilities for success. John, you talked about evidence. You suggested in a provocative way that the days of evidence are over. It's all about implementation, but you really talked about the quality of evidence, the use of evidence, and getting some scale in terms of that evidence. We asked our MGSE staff to challenge you. Now, they sort of did, but many of them agreed. What was fascinating was that most of our audience actually agreed with what you were saying. But the common theme that came out all the time was, these are great ideas, but how do we actually do this? What's the role that we can play? So that's what today is all about, targeting those. Now, we've asked you to continue to put questions or comments in our Q&A. Now, they're going to be live this time, so there's no distractions, but we really want to see what's happening. And as per usual, we'll take these questions, we'll take these comments, and we'll analyse them and put them on our reflection page once we put them all together. The only other thing that I would ask our audience to do is, if you've got a thought for how we continue the series and what we might do next, put it up in the Q&A, because we'll keep them, and that's what we'll think about when we do our next question. I guess, given the number of questions we've had, we should turn to the very first question. And actually, Yong, I'm going to ask you, because I think, and actually, let me back up and remind you, all of our speakers are working at home, and please excuse any internet slowness or slurring of words or dogs barking. So Yong, one of the things that you talked about was the grammar of schooling. And what I really want you to think about is, what in this new world, how are we going to change the grammar of schooling? I want you to think about systems and schools. And I want you to think about systems and schools, and what would be the very first thing that a school might be able to do in their place to change the grammar of schooling.
Well, thank you, Janet, and thanks everybody. I think this is it's a wonderful webinar. I'm glad to get a chance to come to the end to make some practical suggestions. To me, I think the most important thing that a system, a school, a teacher can do is to give students the time and space in the curriculum so they can exercise more self-determination and autonomy. So what does that mean? You know, if I were in a school, I would encourage schools to offer more opportunity for students to have their voice and choice. For example, you could have, many schools have done this, like a genius hour a week and a passion course, you know, for students to pursue their own individual interest and strength. That's, I think, is something we can do. And also teachers, you could do the same. If you are teaching reading at a certain class, you could have students to have more voice of what they would like to read, what they would like to write, a passion project. I think the key around this, you know, is that how we use COVID as an opportunity to involve students in determining how schools runs, what they want to learn, how they want to learn, when they want to learn, to connect to themselves. I think this will connect very well with Janet's, you know, the different capabilities. Students have to have a lot more autonomy. I know schools may not be ready to do it, you know, all the time, but how about Fridays? Can you open Friday as a student day? Students can exercise their self-determination in a certain domain. The challenge is this, is that we need anything students do be part of the curriculum, you know, part of the regular course, not just as an extracurricular. So we would assign teachers to help them, and students will be supported to build that.
So panel, you've heard what Yong has said. And again, this is about getting students to do things like engage with passion projects. Individual teachers can work with students around reading time. Some schools I saw on the chat function are already doing this kinds of thing. Schools haven't changed for 150 years. We've had the same old thing. So your thoughts? Who's going to dive in first? Oh, I've got Matt coming in here wanting to respond. Yes, Matt.
Now, I'm curious about this statement about schools not having changed in 150 years, because I think they have. I think schools have changed a lot. We see this technology that's being used in schools these days has been, you know, in some ways, it has had a big impact, negative and positive. But also, I think in my area, in learning intervention, we see that there's a greater diversity of kids coming into our schools. Like, kids with disabilities didn't really access the Victorian education system until the 1970s in any capacity. So I'm curious what the other panelists have to say about this.
Well, I agree here a lot of what you're saying, Matt, in terms of, yeah, there have been some incremental changes, and they are in many cases for the better. But if you did still take that test, could somebody, Rip Van Winkle from 150 years ago, walk into a class and teach today? Yes, they could, and they'd see very similar things. But the point I hear you making is not so much about has it changed, but the speed of change. And when I hear Yong talking and passion projects, they're there now. The curriculum already allows time to do that, already allows permission to do that. It's the speed of doing it. It's the contingencies to encourage to do it. But I want to put the question back. Before kids go and take Fridays to do by themselves, they have to be taught skills to teach themselves. They have to be taught the skills of self-regulation, to use our jargon. And like I know here, for instance, in the Victorian curriculum in the VCA, they allow these kind of passion projects as part of their final assessment. Hardly any school uses it. And the only schools that tend to use it are the ones that have the rich, the wealthy, or the highly achieved students. And my message from that is, it's too hard to allow kids to make their own choice unless we deliberately teach them. That's what I want to speed up, not passion. I want them to teach up so they can be indulged and teach themselves about passion. So I don't see a problem with the current structures. So I'm struggling too. What's stopping us doing it?
Sandra, I saw you chafing at the bit there.
Well, look, I think Matt's really lucky because he's working in probably the one area of education where technology has, in some cases, revolutionised opportunities for kids. Technology-assisted learning for kids with special needs is just absolutely mind-blowingly brilliant in some areas. But for mainstream kids, I think that the problem is not that I think schools are much nicer places than when I was at school as a student. And I think the curriculum is much broader. But the problem is that the challenge has got even broader during those times, so that it's not enough for kids to learn what they learned, what we taught in the 80s, to the kids who were, say, the top 40 or 50% academically. Now all kids have got to learn a lot more, and that's where I think the challenge has changed, and why we need to be shifting the grammar, because I think that they are, as John said, recognisably the same places, and they really need to be a lot different because the challenge is different.
Janet, Daniela.
I just wanted to say, I think we've probably got hundreds of teachers, educators, screaming at the screen, wanting to tell John that it's time to uncrowd the curriculum. It's, you know, there is so much that needs to be covered, and there is a stigma attached to those students that aren't competitive, aren't looking for that top ATAR score. And, you know, we almost need to give schools the permission to stop operating in this way, so that kids can just deep dive, relax in terms of spending time learning, rather than having to cover everything off like a checklist.
Yeah, but Danielle, I'm not a fan of this argument we should clutter or declutter the curriculum. It's kind of a bipolar, which is not real. We should reduce the amount of we have to cover so we can go deep in passion. And I don't think tinkering with the curriculum, yet again, we're going to tinker with the curriculum. teachers out there now who are screaming at the screen right now, and many of them are doing this now. They are reducing and they're saying we're going to look at this and we're going to allow the students to go deeper. Now, Sandra's going to tell me in a moment the assessments can be a constraint, and I will agree with her. But I don't see the last thing we want to do is play yet again with the curriculum. Yeah, there's lots there. I'm a fan of countries like New Zealand, where the whole curriculum is 39 pages as opposed to our 2,500 pages. I'm with you on that. But I don't think that's a constraint, because they're doing it now. I'm going to bring
Yong back in here, because I'm seeing that he wants to respond to the comments that you're all making. And then Melitta.
Well, Daniela and John, you guys can fight over the curriculum. My point is, I think I'm kind of siding with John. I don't like to play with big documents. I honestly, that impact, maybe there, may not be there. I think every teacher, every school can indeed do something in their current situation. And so that's why I think I would give space. The second thing I want to say is that, as Matt is talking about progress, I think we have so many millions of schools in the world. There are some schools that make some great progress, but the majority of schools, I would say, the grammar is right. You know, the John's test is correct. Has not changed. The third point I really want to say is that we also have so many millions, billions of students. They are very diverse. Some of them can learn on their own. Some of them need help. Some of them need a lot of help. I think we just need to diversify. But the key to the old grammar of schooling does not involve students as an active agent. So how do we involve students as an active agent in the process? So that's really what I was answering to.
I'm going to bring Melitta in, and Melitta, a quick comment from you before I turn to Matt, because I have a specific question for you, Matt, that I want to raise. Melitta.
I was just going to say that, you know, this whole idea about passion projects and giving students time and space sounds lovely, but I do agree with Daniela about the crowded curriculum, but I also think that teachers create that situation themselves in believing that they have to cover all of the curriculum and do all the things that are asked of them. That there's flexibility within the curriculum to allow for teacher autonomy. It's just I think that principals need to have faith in their staff and knowing that they are working to get the best from their students.
Interesting you raised the issue again about teachers and their relationship with leadership. I want to follow up on a question that came across the 3 episodes, and it was all about the focus falling on teachers. Once again, we're asking teachers to do more and more. And one of the questions that came up, and Matt, I'm going to direct this to you, given you started this, is given the crowded curriculum, as you've been so hearing, there's this big need to engage all of our students in learning. And we really want our teachers to be autonomous. We want them to do passion projects. We want them to use technologies. What in this very busy world can a teacher actually do? Just even give us one thing that a teacher could do tomorrow to make things a little better.
I think there's something that comes to mind straight away, and that was the biggest change in my teaching practice, was collaboration with peers. I know that sounds very simple, but when I first started teaching, I tried to do everything myself. And then actually beginning to plan as a team with teachers and shifting that responsibility from myself to our team, a collective responsibility for learning, was a way of increasing efficiency in how we were planning to teach the curriculum. But what was really interesting is we actually started talking about how we were teaching as well. And I think that's probably the more important conversation, was probably about how we were actually teaching together and how we were actually meeting the needs of all our students. And something that came from that collaboration was introducing these low stakes peer observations. We would actually go and watch each other teach. And the idea of what could I take from my own teaching? What could I learn from these colleagues? So I think, yes, collaboration is great for managing a very, planning for a very busy curriculum, but it's also a great way to actually improve our teaching practice. So I'm interested to hear from the rest of the panel on their experiences of teacher collaboration, and particularly observing other teachers. Under what conditions can this work? Under what conditions doesn't this work?
Well, I think I might bring John in for that one. I think it's perfect for you.
Yeah, you hit a nerve, Matt. Like one of the things with my AITSL hat on is I'm stunned at the incredible collegiality and collaboration, particularly by teachers in their first 10 years. And I think this is a massive future and change we're looking to. Like if you look at teachers 10 to 15 years out and they're very good, they became very good because they did it themselves. The new cohort coming into teacher education, they're coming in much later, average age of 26 when they start teacher education. They brought up in a social network world. They want to be collaborative. And like we'd certainly know that like teacher induction, that whilst 95% of principals argue they have an excellent induction program, less than 40% of new teachers know about it. So we've created an app and we have incredible number of people that come on, new teachers that come onto that app, that talk to each other, share resources, go about the daily work. And there's probably now more induction going on in schools around Australia, not by those that are actually in that school. But the other part of it is that you then ask about watching teachers teach. I'm not a fan of that. I think that's one of our big mistakes when we go into classroom and watch teachers teach. Because all you end up doing is tell the teacher how they should teach better like you. 80% of what happens in the classroom you don't see or hear. So let's get some people going in classrooms to help you see that other 80%. And I think that's like AITSL, for example, have released all their videos, hundreds of them, and with 2 extra buttons. As you're watching the teacher teach, you can press a button and hear how the teacher's thinking. And you can press another button and hear how the kid is thinking. That's what we need to do. That's the exciting part. And this to me is the exciting future. And this is why I'm with the rest of the panel that I want change faster. We can't keep reinforcing the old teacher education model where we put them out in their classes, say, here's your class, they're unique. If you have a problem, come and see me. That is the anti-collegial. That is the most exciting part of where we're going. And if you want anything to work within this business that gives you a smile on your face every day, is work with teachers in their first 2 to 3 years out. They're the most hungry for knowledge. They're exciting to work with. And here's the reality, guys. Not one single organisation or system in this country is set up to work with those people. It's random, not good enough. But that's exciting.
Daniela, I saw you nodding your head there.
Well,
Are you agreeing with John?
Well, I just think, John, are we undermining what our principals are doing out there in schools? Principals are very focused on setting up peer mentoring, setting up very collegiate forums, opportunities for staff to work together on various projects, to team teach, a whole range of different things. Is what you're suggesting undermining what our principals are doing? I'd hate to be doing that.
Well, no, because they're doing, this social media thing is happening right now, even in those schools. And if principals are setting them up, I'm delighted. I'm worried that only 40% are aware of these wonderful programs you're talking about. I want both, but I think the biggest thing is how do we do this as a system and not one school at a time? How do we get principals to come out of the school and talk to each other about how they can encourage professional learning across schools? Now, you're right, it's happening. Not fast enough, not big enough, and too often, those students in their first few years get missed out. I want both. I'm greedy.
I see Sandra wanting to come in.
Yeah, this is just a piece of my experience about collegiality, which I offer with no particular view of what it means. But when we designed the MGSE professional learning activity for teachers that went massively online with 45,000 participants, there was a team of 18 people who worked on that. And I think there were about 4 people who you would think of as teachers. The rest were learning technologists who knew how to make an LMS sing. There were people who made digital artifacts that were very engaging. There were assessment specialists who were able to build automated feedback mechanisms into the LMS. There were librarians who were able to find and curate resources. And that experience for me was really seminal, because it really created an amazingly different learning experience for students. But it wasn't created just by teachers. It was created by a really diverse team who all shared the view of the experience that the learners would have. And so I think now, when I think of collaboration, I think of collaboration between whom? Is it just teachers who are trained in the normal way, or maybe there are other kinds of people who we can bring into the endeavour? Just a thought.
Just before we move on, Sandra, I want you to stop for a minute and start thinking about student capabilities, because that's the big area. Because what we've just heard is what we need to be doing is giving students control over their learning, and individual teachers can do that. Individual teachers can create time to give students control over their learning. We're questioning whether all principals are doing that. Daniela is saying yes, absolutely, our leadership can. I heard Matt say technology is going to really help, and it is happening in other areas. And I heard Melitta say, let's give them some autonomy to do this. But it's a little deeper than this, I think, because you raise the issue of dispositions and certain capabilities. And what we know in the Victorian curriculum, for example, those capabilities are already starting to come in. But, you know, some people are shying away from them because they're really difficult. So once again, we're asking teachers to recognise these new capabilities. We're asking systems to recognise those new capabilities. So my question to you is, how do we get not only teachers and systems to value, explore these new capabilities, and then assess them? Little question.
In answering that, look, I went through the comments over the last few weeks of our listeners here, and I saw one that really resonated with me, and I just want to read it because I think it goes to that question. This person said, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, but not exactly, "It sucks my will to live to worry about the role of policymakers, universities, etc. Nothing prevents me as a teacher from creating magic in my classroom for my learners, even with the current limitations of a crowded curriculum, a senior certificate hijacked by universities, and a deeply conservative set of opinion leaders." Now, I say to that, bravo. And what I say to all of those people who work like that, and I would imagine most of the people who are listening now are in that category, that my practical suggestion would be to look to the assessment that you're doing as you're creating that magic, because as John says, the evidence that you can generate in your own classroom is the most powerful evidence for improving the experience of your students. However, even those people who create that magic are, as I see it, eventually chafe at the grammar of schooling that still constrains people who are trying to create the time and the space, the agency that the students need. And that chasing comes from standardised testing, assessments, it comes from the curriculum being chunked up into subjects, it comes from the lockstep progression through the curriculum, all of these things that we call the grammar of schooling. Now, what I've noticed is that these magic makers who get to the point where they're chafing against these things then turn to their school leadership and say, help us get rid of the chafe, help us reimagine a new grammar of schooling so that we can do more as we watch our students progress along these continua. So I call those people the first movers in the new grammar of schooling because we haven't invented it yet. So I guess the practical thing that I think that that magic makers who are getting to the point where they're chafing about the grammar can do is turn their schools into first movers who are inventing the new grammar. And when you're doing that, I think it would be great to hear about it because we need more stories about what's going on with these first movers.
So you're suggesting that these stories, these first movers, number one, make the action happen. Number two, focus on the assessment. And I heard you suggest that John thought that this new kind of evidence might be valuable. And so, John, let's turn to you to get a comment from what Sandra is suggesting. And I'd really like you to focus a little bit on this idea of what's credible evidence then.
Well, I see the current situation here in Victoria and Australia as kind of like a game of Jenga. You know, we push out the things that we're very close to the thing falling over. And like right at the moment, the CODREC report came out. Your reports come out, Sandra and Jim, on learning profiles and micro-credentialing, the Victorian VCA. COVID is helping and asking teachers to come up with more of a prediction of what's going to happen. The report, Jeff Masters' report of the curriculum in New South Wales, the rebel group of states that are putting up about NAPLAN at the moment, they're all saying the same thing. It is time to fundamentally, and this is my one thing I want to see happen, say to universities, what happens in schools is our business, get out of it. Provided you take into account what happens in achievement at high school, but we're not going to select for you. You can select yourself on the basis of what we do. We're going to certify kids in terms of what they can do and what they can do in terms of how well they can do it. And that's the basis of what you were talking about, micro-credentialing. It's the basis of learner profile. It'll take away that massive constraint. Now, it will dramatically affect our secondary schools because suddenly the hierarchy of schools where the more experienced senior teachers get the higher grades is not going to be the same thing. They're going to have to teach across. It's going to mean panel beating. It's going to be seen in some schools, some kids, as critical as chemistry. And that will upset the status quo. But we're very close. We're about 20 years behind many other Western countries in the world, pushing over the dominance of a narrow canon, a narrow curriculum. We're so close, and I think this is exciting, and I ask all of us, push, push, push. Now's the time. If anything's going to happen, we have a chance of breaking that mold.
But you're not actually telling us how to push.
I think it's the advocacy, like we're hearing in the comments and the questions from the people that are on this notion, the notion that COVID is forced the system to say the final exam won't count as much as the teacher assessments in terms of the performance. Like, I want kids to be challenged and work hard at high school on the kind of things that we want them to be challenged to work hard on, which is panel beating, which is baristership, which is water polo coaching, which is chemistry, which is history. And I want to see those as equally as critical to the kids that are doing it, provided there's quality and excellence for those kids. We are close to that. But if we break away that current narrowness of the VC as we have it and say there are multiple ways, break the VC up so we don't add things together to get a common score. Because what do we get a common score for? For university selection. Let them do that. But as far as school's concerned, we're going to have a learner profile. I think we're very close. It won't take much to push it across.
Yong?
I just want to jump into to say a few things. I think responding to the whole thing is that, I mean, number one, if you go back to the idea when John was talking about COVID, we really have to acknowledge we are experiencing some historical times, and this is a good time to change. So going back to Matt's suggestion about teacher collaboration, student collaboration, we need to acknowledge that students today with online, with staying home or whatever is happening, if you look at US right now, we go to school, we're back to home. So this uncertainty should enable us to collaborate beyond our own school. So even going back to what John was talking about, the certified micro-credentialing, all those things, there is a broader place students can learn from, collaborate beyond the immediate school, because I'm also aware of the rural schools in Victoria, the other schools in indigenous areas. You have all diversity. So how do you get students themselves go beyond their immediate schools to collaborate, to focus on things? I think we need to acknowledge that students today do face a different world of learning. And how do we get them to go beyond that? I think, Sandra, that's the same issue, right? If a student can do something, can learn something, does the learning profile become basically a certification? If a student learns something online from a MOOC, can we say, yeah, okay, you're good enough? Can we rethink from that angle? I'm basically arguing for giving students the opportunity to learn and help certify that, so with the school, even if the school does not have the capacity. So there is other platforms for learning to happen. And Australia has a lot of organizations that help youth to engage in learning in different ways.
Go, Sandra.
Look, I think I'm usually the one advocating for change here, so I'm just going to surprise everyone by saying I think we need to be cautious here, because the fact of the matter is that things like ATAR and VCE and so forth, they are a way where kids can pick their pathways through. And what we see as these decay, so ATAR is decaying in importance, the VCE is decaying in importance, kids are moving with their feet. My concern is that it's going to turn into a dog-eat-dog world where the best provisioned are the best recognised for whatever happens post-school. So this is why underneath my advocacy of things like micro-credentials and assessment of general capabilities is a real desire for some common equal playing field in the recognition of students' learning and what they know and can do, that is curated by teachers, because I think teachers are the experts in this way, so that we don't have every university rapaciously pulling off the cream from the leafy suburbs and people who are not in leafy suburbs being left out because no one trusts what the schools are saying about what they know and can do. So I think that's an impassioned plea for the profession to insist that we have a say in this and that there be an equal playing field in whatever way we recognise the breadth of what students know and can do, so that no one gets left out. But my biggest fear is the dog-eat-dog principle of market economy for school leavers. I think that would be a tragedy. And I think it's the profession that's got to stand up.
Sandra, I hear what you're saying. And before we target a little bit more about the assessment, because I do want to move to Melitta and think about diversity, I'd actually like to bring Jim in, because Jim, again, I say this to you frequently, you have experienced all aspects of our sector. Well, you're hearing all of this. What are you thinking?
So, yeah, no, thanks, Janet. I agree with fundamentally parts of everything that's been said today, but I just want to take it back to this whole notion of these 4 episodes. It was about propelling education through COVID. So what have we actually learnt from COVID that we didn't know before? 3 things. First thing is that schools, systems, states, the whole country, the world even, can change. We didn't know that so many people could all change at the same time in the same direction. I'm not saying the change was all good, I'm not saying it was all bad, but everyone changed. Secondly, everyone agreed with the change. All of the teachers that didn't have digital skills still agreed that they had to find some way to engage kids outside of the normal schooling situation. The third thing is, and the most important thing is, not only did the teachers agree with the change, they led the change. Now that's the point I want to make, is when people have been asking, well, what do we do after COVID? How do we change practice? Well, first of all, we can't go back to the old normal, because COVID has changed our belief in what people can do. So my experience as a teacher, as a regional director, as a system leader, and now as a Dean of Education has been that everything in education is top down. everything. So teachers get policies from governments, they get them from systems. And so what we need to do as a result of what we've learnt in COVID is work from the bottom up. And I've seen some amazing work in my last job, which was in Queensland, a wonderful school in South Brisbane, where the principal gave money to 4 staff, got them out of the classroom, and they created their own school's contextualised reading program. Now, there's 1 million reading programs out there. But what happened in that school was that NAPLAN results and every other measure they had within 3 years, 2 years in fact, went up exponentially because the teachers owned it, they had agency, and that goes to Yong's point about students having agency. I think we should give teachers the agency. I think we should allow teachers to be able to make the big policy decisions within schools and to be able to drive the changes that we need going forward. I could talk about this for the rest of the day and I won't, Janet, but I do think if we learn anything out of COVID, it is that teachers, when they lead, can make things happen that other actors in the space cannot make happen.
So Jim, I heard you say, yes, we can do this, and things practically that can happen in schools, that principals can come in and we can really focus on different contextual processes. I guess one of the questions that constantly came up from the last 3 seminars was the idea of focusing just on context to aid our inequalities across the system. And I know, Melitta, you made some comment about the Eurocentric way of working and that some of our students, particularly our Indigenous students, are left out as a consequence. Now, in this world that everybody's talking about, how are we going to ensure that we are reducing inequalities? And if you listen to Jim, he's saying that working on that in that context and making teachers leaders, they can actually do that. What's your response?
Well, firstly, thanks, Jim, for starting that conversation. I think the beauty of policy is that it is ambiguous and that we're able to manipulate and innovate. And I always tell my students within initial teacher education here that they're only limited by their own creativity or lack of innovation in the ways in which they work. I mean, I guess I was blessed in the sense that at the very last school that I was working at, I was able to have a lot of autonomy within the classroom that I taught. And it was a 100% Indigenous student school. But, you know, in a year 10 class, we studied Romeo and Juliet, despite the fact that the kids were actually working at a year 5 to year 7 literacy level. We negotiated and the assessment types and we found ways in which to work. And I mean, I had kids rewrite an entire scene of Romeo and Juliet in Aboriginal English so that we could look at the evolution of language and the ways in which they work. You know, I just think that, yes, we need the top down, but we also need the bottom up that Jim was talking about. I worry that teachers often will become fatigued if they're a single or an individual teacher within the system or within a school that's working for change. That they, but then I heard John talking about these networks, and I talked to the students within my Australian Indigenous education class that they're very blessed in the sense that where they're actually now, they can start building a network. So there's always that question of how do I embed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures within my discipline. They already have a cohort with them. And even if one of them does one lesson in one school and another, and they start sharing, they're already getting several examples that they can draw on in future years.
So, Sandra?
Yeah, I'd like to ask Melitta a question because, you know, what we're trying to do with these new grammars is to expand the idea of what success means for a student so that every student becomes a creative, confident learner who can thrive. And it strikes me that part of that for Aboriginal kids might be to actually have Aboriginal community ways of knowing and being valued a lot more, so that we can actually do things like recognise the contribution of knowledge and know-how in that area as contributing to a definition of success for the Australian community. So I guess my question is, do you reckon if we worked with communities, we could get more radical about what constitutes success, so that Aboriginal ways of knowing and being and is part of what we recognise?
That would be a beautiful day and a beautiful school. There's plenty of opportunities. I mean, part of the strategy, or the Indigenous education strategy, involves bringing in Aboriginal voices and ensuring that parents, I mean, it's within the Alice Springs Declaration as well, where schools are invited to build those relationships and build that rapport with community, and that community should have a voice in what happens within schools. I think it's more schools having to recognise that the knowledge that elders bring into schools shouldn't be on a voluntary kind of basis, that they're actually sharing knowledge and educating students about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures, and that should be recognised and remunerated. But there's definitely ways in which it can happen. Sometimes I question about, you know, is it time for an Indigenous university or an Indigenous only school where we could actually seek ways in which parents could have autonomy in what is actually happening. But, you know, that's truly radical.
It is getting radical. More revolution, Sandra. I hear that. Yong, a comment to you before we move on to our next topic.
I was just trying to add that I think we do have, like US going through right now, some social reckoning about race, about all these relationships. I think in Australia has done much better than the US, but still needs to go deeper. I think, you know, with the Aboriginals, the issue might be more complicated. I just want to add another thing, if I don't have a chance to speak before the end, is that to go back to Jim's talk about is the idea that we actually do have the possibility to make change. I think a lot of times, you know, we are the prisoners of our own imagination. We always imagine we cannot make changes. Actually, everybody can do something. That's why, I mean, that's why I understand. I feel very awkward to giving specific suggestions to a broader audience as big as this. You know, unless it's a real suggestion, would be very specific, contextualized. We got over 200 people listening to us. They're from different schools. So the only thing I really know, I think only valuable advice I'll give everybody, if we go back, look at our own situation, policymakers, school leaders, teachers, we only constrain our own imagination. I mean, I think everybody can make big changes. So the direction for me is let students do something, let them make some decisions, agency. I think Jim's idea about that teacher agency is key as well.
But just thinking about teacher agency, I'm going to bring Daniela in here, because one of the other key themes that came out, and it's coming out in the Q&A at the moment, is it's all, again, it's about teachers. So if this is going to be a new world where not only are we expecting our teachers to engage in this big curriculum, we're expecting them to engage with community, we're expecting them to build new programs. These are all really tough skills, as well as assessing new capabilities, let alone attempting to teach them. How are we going to train all of our teachers? She's laughing at me already. How are we going to train all of these new teachers in this new world? What's the one thing that teacher educators can do? Let's move it to there. What can teacher educators do?
I think if we just take a look at this in simplistic terms, the period of disruption in education has taught us that educators are adaptable and they're innovative and they're resilient. And on the flip side, we've learned that there's this spotlight on inequality, you know, really highlighting the fragility of human social beings. And so there is that importance on wellbeing. I've often thought about this, and John, I'm not suggesting another year of teacher education. I know you'd be thrilled with that on top of what we currently do. But I think alongside the great value that we place on disciplinary knowledge in initial teacher education, I think we really should strengthen our courses through a greater focus on developing students as capable, resilient, critical consumers of information, ready to adapt, to respond to an uncertain future. How do we do that? I don't have the answers for you right here and right now. What I do know though, and I agree with Sandra about being cautious about the decisions that we make, in particular with ATAR, even though we do currently have a system where we have, you know, the ATAR pathway and a VET VCAL pathway. The stigma is always there. And until we get rid of that, or until we rethink that, everybody is going to have tunnel vision in a school, thinking that the most important thing are the results. And that's how schools market themselves. And that's what people will be asking initial teacher education programs to do, making sure that they get the best teachers that can get those results in. So it is a conundrum. I suppose my heart is saying, you know, I agree with all of you that we do really need to focus on how we develop problem solving, how do we develop and inspire innovation, how do we foster entrepreneurship. You know, there are lots of kids out there that feel that they are a failure in schools, but if you have a look at what they're doing outside of school, they're brilliant, but nobody actually stops to recognise that.
I'm going to start a bit of a trend here, Daniela. I really want you to say to me, as a teacher...
I'm being too fluffy, am I?
Janet, as a teacher educator, I want you to tell me what to do. What do I do in my class tomorrow?
In your schools?
In my class. I'm a teacher educator.
You're a teacher educator.
Yes. Initial teacher education is my thing. What am I doing tomorrow? One thing.
Think about how you can inspire innovation and lateral thinking in your students.
Okay. John, I'm a policy maker. Yes, John, wake up. I'm a policy maker. And what's the one thing that me as a policy maker you're going to tell me to do tomorrow?
Value expertise.
Say that again.
Value expertise.
Of who?
Of the people in schools. As Jim has said, it's out there in spades. We value structures, we value systems, we value tinkering with curriculum. We don't value expertise. Let's do that.
Okay. Melitta, what's the one thing you want a teacher to do to reduce inequalities?
I want them to be brave, to take chances and to take risks.
Take some chances. Sandra, you're going to think about what a school leader is going to do. So what's a school leader going to do to introduce new capabilities into their school?
Oh, gee, I think Melitta's got it. I reckon it's take risks, take your courage in your hand, mobilise your teachers around you and start reimagining what schools might look like in the next 20 years and start doing it now.
So what's the one thing that they would do then? What could they do? Give me an example.
Decide that curriculum was not going to be packaged up into subject categories, and they're going to open up a negotiated curriculum to be built on kids' passions.
Okay. Yong, I'm going to flip it on what you've been talking about on its head. I want you to tell a student, what's the one thing that they're going to do tomorrow to take control over their learning in their classroom?
Well, I was going to say as a teacher and a principal, but I'm going to say that anyway. I think
say that, and then I'll come back and say, tell me about the student.
Teachers and school leaders, I want them to see the student before they see the curriculum in school. When they come to, they look at the student as individuals who needs to do something with their life, rather than they have a curriculum they have to impose. So that's really one big change. So if I were a student, I would look and say, okay, what do I want in my life and what course makes sense, and I'm going to pursue that. I'm not going to, because I'm asked to do this, I shall do it. I will say what makes sense to me, and I'll pursue that. If there is no such thing, I'll talk to my teacher and my principal to get that done.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, Matt, there were two things that I wanted to ask you. Number one, as a teacher, what am I going to do to ensure I'm using the right technologies? And number two, if I can do two for you, what am I going to do to ensure learning for all?
I'm going to answer the second one first to throw you off. I'm going to go to Google with my team and type in response to intervention. I'm going to Google that and find out and learn about the response to intervention approach, finding out how we can really optimize our tiers. One, teaching, which means all our kids, our whole class teaching, get that right. We reduce the number of kids who need specialised intervention. In terms of technology, I would look at the learning outcomes and find out which technology has the most research behind it, saying it's going to help me get to these outcomes. It may be using digital technology, it may be using traditional teaching methods. It's what is going to help students learn the best.
Thank you. Okay, now we're virtually out of time. So what we've done in this session is we've talked about 6 key themes. And those key themes were thinking about how do we reduce inequalities? What do we do in terms of this new evidence, implementation and assessment? What are these things called new capabilities? How do we value and support them? How do we change the grammar of schooling? What are the key things that we need to do? What do teacher educators need to do? And then how do we work to ensure that teachers can respond to this new environment? Jim, you've heard all of these things. Before I hand it over to you, there's one comment in the Q&A that keeps capturing my attention and a lot of other people's attention as well. And it basically says is when will teachers be recognised as the experts? And I think that's a key thing. It's a key thing that is critical, but of course it impacts on all the things you're saying. So Jim, I've saved the best for last. As you'll note on the Q&A, there is a number of our MGSE staff who are listening to this webinar. And so my challenge to you as the Dean, Jim, is what's the one thing that MGSE can do in this new world? Over to you. Thanks.
We can do, in fact, exactly what we're doing right now. We can create an initial teacher education curriculum that matches the world that students are going to move into, the post-COVID world, not the pre-COVID world, the world that has changed forever, and the world that relies on humanity, and it relies on individual skills, and it relies on, as Yong said in the paper, not trying to compete with computers. And so that is about focusing on talents, on passions, and having the basic skills. So that's what we need to create. Our initial teacher education students, as John said, in the early years of their teaching career, are exuberant, they're passionate, they're excited, and they're incredibly intelligent. They are our future, and we need to make sure when we move those graduate students into schools that they're incredibly well supported, and as a university that we still continue to have a role with the school in helping that induction and making sure that they're successful right from day one.
Thank you. Our time is up. So I'm actually going to hand back to you, Jim, because we definitely don't want to go over time. People have things to go. Please remember, let us know what you're interested in terms of future webinars and what we can do to continue this conversation. So over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Janet, and can I thank all of our panellists. You're all really incisive and really different in your thinking, and it's come together really brilliantly. So can I also thank our audience members that have been with us either for individual episodes or all the way through. We've really appreciated your questioning and trying to shape the direction that this program has gone over the 4 weeks. We do hope you found this stimulating, and as Janet said, we do want to continue the conversation, and we'll look forward to having further opportunities to engage with people in the field as we go forward. We're still not out of COVID yet. We haven't propelled our way through it. So we do need to make sure that we're getting the best possible expertise and advice and research to be able to deal with young people in this really unique time that has given us all great challenges that we're yet to solve. So thank you very much. I wish you all well in your own work and for the challenges that you face, and we look forward to being in contact again soon. Just a reminder that this has been taped. It is available, and we look forward to engaging with you as we go forward. Thank you very much.